So we are live, Change Everything Live, with your host, Andrae Bailey. I'm excited today to have a couple special guests on what is going to be a very special show, Change Everything Live with Andrae Bailey, talking about Game of Thrones with my new friends, Jana Matthews, Associate Professor of Medieval Studies at Rollins College here in Central Florida, and Ryan Murphy, award-winning playwright and Hollywood executive. No, that's the other Ryan Murphy.
A+ student. A+ student.
A+ student.
That might be more important.
Yes.
Who we have identified as one of the top Game of Thrones experts in fandom. Is that what you call it, fandom?
Sure.
Yeah, that we found alive. So Jenna Matthews, Ryan Murphy, here talking today about Game of Thrones. What is become a cultural professor? Do I call you professor? Doctor?
Just
Doc?
Whatever you want. Jana's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jana, I'll kind of start with you, and we'll bounce around here to Ryan as well. Again, for those of you watching Change Everything Live on CBS, you can watch the full interview. We'll probably be talking about 90 minutes total, but you'll only see 28 of those minutes on CBS on WKMG. You can click on Apple iTunes or watch the full broadcast on YouTube. For those of you watching on YouTube, you're fine. You're set. So why do you think this show, Game of Thrones, this HBO phenomenon, how has it become as big as it's become in our culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think Game of Thrones tells a big story, and so we all like epics, and whether it's Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, I mean, Game of Thrones is another kind of a show and a book series that follows into the same line. And so at the same time as it tells really, really big stories about human existence, it also tells a story that each of us can relate to. So there's a point in which it engages both males and females, and I think that's been one of the really key successes of the show, is that it's not a show that just captures one sort of gendered audience, but has the ability to bridge the gender gap. But also it tells stories, and it's, I think in microcosm, illuminates both, we can talk about this later, maybe every aspect of human history, and puts it on the same stage at the same time, but also the range of human emotions. So everything from lust and greed to anger and frustration magnified. And so we all feel those things. It's just like we just sort of see them animated in characters that take them to the 10th degree.
And you teach it, for those of you just tuning in, you teach a class on this at an actual school.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it?
Like students sign up for this class. And Ryan, you've taken this class?
You bet we sign up for that class.
Okay. How many students do you take at any given time?
So, I mean, it's a popular class. I think it's one of those courses that sort of sells itself just by the content, but we usually try to keep it at Rollins at about under 20, so I usually try to cap it about 18.
Okay, how many times have you taught the class so far?
I've taught it, I think maybe this is my 5th time. This is the last time I'm teaching it. I'm retiring it.
You're retiring the Game of Thrones
I know, right?
class with the season 8 finale.
It wouldn't be right to take it on past that.
And so Ryan, talk a little bit about this class. You've taken this class as a Game of Thrones. How do you describe yourself? A Game of Thrones fanatic?
Fans fine, nerds fine.
Okay.
It's all fine.
Tell us about this class.
So it's medieval literature based. All of the readings are based in proper medieval literature, going off of per actual studies. But we connect all of it to the more socially accessible, currently very popular Game of Thrones series. So we use that as a lens to discuss real medieval literature.
So if you have not seen season 8, you want to turn off this broadcast immediately, because we don't want to give you spoilers. But I thought, and Ryan, I want to get your take on this, season 8, Brienne of Tarth knighted by Jaime Lannister. The relationship between Jaime Lannister and Brienne of Tarth, to me, has been fascinating. My perspective on it, again, just as a fan and as someone who likes to think deeply on topics, is that Brienne of Tarth is someone who's a tall, strong woman who has all of these attributes of a man, if you will, or what we say a great man in society is. If men are going to be who society says they should be, we're supposed to be strong and tough and never cry and never weak, and that's the essence of a great man as built up by society. So she has all these qualities, but she has one problem: she's not a man. And she meets Jaime Lannister, who is my favorite character in the entire series. That might be very telling of me as a person, but I love Jaime Lannister. I think Jaime Lannister is...
Is it the incest that you like, or like what's a?
No. I don't like that part. Don't like that part. But I like the fact that Jaime Lannister is made out to be this incredible villain.
Yeah.
Even though he saved everyone and continues to be, probably based on his circumstances, the most noble person in the show. Meaning his father was maybe the worst example of a human you could possibly have. He has a sister who's also his partner / wife figure, who is probably the most evil person in the show. He worked for the Mad King, and the Mad King, for whatever reasons, we'll have to reference your book in a minute, probably was the most dangerous political leader pre-current Game of Thrones characters. I actually think there could be a storyline we'll see in the next few days that I don't think you're the kin of that man and not have his qualities in you. And when your power is tested, some bad things might happen. But I think Jaime Lannister continues to show what I've seen is real leadership. And real leadership isn't theoretical. Real leadership is, you're the president of the United States. You're the king of France. You're the head of a company, and you have power and so much around you. It's so easy to make the bad choices. And by the way, if you make the bad choice, you're often rewarded for that bad choice. But he, under those circumstances, continues to make good choices when the chips are down. He leaves his sister when she broke her promise to follow in the battle against the White Walkers. He befriends Brienne of Tarth and really on multiple occasions risks his life for her, and what is alluded to, really loves her. They have a romance. And again, I think Brienne of Tarth looks at Jaime Lannister almost the way the nerdy girl in high school would look at the jock, using an 80s reference. This is the guy I'd always want. And Jaime Lannister looks at Brienne of Tarth and her character, her integrity, a person who would die for virtue. And Jaime looks at her and says, if I could ever be that. Mm-hmm. And I think that collision and that almost contradiction of personalities is why those two work. And I think people watch that and go, yeah, that's kind of the way life is.
Yeah, absolutely.
We all want to be heroes, but a lot of times we make tough decisions in the real world, and opposites kind of attract.
And that's a love story that can never be. And how much is that just like real life, right? Where they're physically and they're socially unavailable to one another.
Yep.
Kind of profoundly. So
unfortunately, he can't be with Brienne of Tarth. He's going to have to stick with his sister, who's a murderer. So, Ryan, who's your favorite character again? Arya.
Arya.
Tell me, what do you think Arya's biggest challenges have been, and how she overcome them?
Finding herself within the world as a woman, again, as most of the female characters in the show do. Also very similar to Brienne's character arc there, where she bucked social conventions, came up as a tomboy, learned to fight instead of sew the way Sansa did.
Arya has become one of the Arya has become one of the most fierce warriors, although she's the smallest character other than Tyrion in the entire show. What do you think the bigger message is there with Arya?
Size matters not.
Size matters not. It's Yoda, a little Yoda reference.
Can always learn from Yoda.
We can always. Doesn't it all always come back to Yoda? Isn't that what it's all about? So, kind of just thinking once again about the gender discussion. Sansa and her sister Arya, similar but very different. So Sansa was, someone referred to Sansa to me recently as the most annoying character in the show. And I actually kind of get that, because Sansa is caught between some of the virtues of her family and some of those lusts for power, and continuously walks right up to the line of screwing everything up, and somehow, stays and keeps things from going off the cliff. she also, though, is a woman who's overcome great challenges at the same time. So I think people look at Sansa and they see almost that inner struggle that someone would have or a woman would have.
Sansa's off script, right? So I mean, up until this point, she's been a woman who, like a medieval woman, was traded between men. So she was a pawn that was used to, forge alliances between two houses and two nations if she was a real person. And then, she is in charge of largely, right, or was put in charge of the kind of the Stark house of Winterfell. And for the first time, there's no script on how to act because it's never happened before. And so she's making up the rules as it goes along. And that is, right, I mean, what you're seeing there, I think, is kind of the fits and starts, the successes, the struggles as she's grappling with this new role and, a role that she's never inhabited before. And that one is largely imaginary.
Yeah.
Dan?
Do you guys talk about in your class the rewriting the script, the Me Too movement? Do you dive into that as part of this topic? I think it's incredibly important to have that conversation, and it's been an incredibly important conversation. But it's especially important with the historical context again added to it.
Yeah.
So that was just okay for in not just American society, in Western society, but in the history of our species. It was just okay to treat women a certain way, and to see Sansa overcome that. That's an incredibly, again, an archetype of a bigger conversation that's important and that needs to be had. How did the young folks in your class react when you take these deeper dives into their psychology or into their society using Game of Thrones?
I mean, I think it's a really rich and powerful tool to really get them to think in nuanced and complex ways. I think maybe another example I could use is the wall. And so we've got this, the dominant architectural feature in Game of Thrones is this wall, this massive thing, which has a very, very clear,
which, by the way, pre-Donald Trump.
Yeah, I know, but that's exactly what I'm saying.
Pre-Donald Trump. Is the wall in that book there?
Of course.
Show us that book.
For thousands of years.
What is this book you have here?
This is The World of Ice and Fire, the main source book on the books. For The Song of Ice and Fire.
Okay, and so the wall is in that book?
Of course the wall is in this book. The wall is one of the oldest.
So if the president tweets out that he was the first to the wall, we can reference his book.
We can show him giants building a wall of ice and say, hey, you weren't here for this, Donald.
Okay, so just not to get political, but again, fascinating that in this story that is, how old would that have been? When would that have first been written?
Oh, the book?
Yeah, the idea of the book and the wall would probably be 15 years old?
Oh, at least.
The first book came out in 1990, or the early 90s.
Wow.
So, I mean, the wall in Game of Thrones is based on Hadrian's Wall, which is like a real Roman wall that was built in between southern Scotland and northern England, and you can still go visit it today, the remnants of it.
Gotcha. So in your class, talking about when humans feel like they have to create a disconnect from something that's scary.
Yep. We build a wall.
We build a wall.
That's exactly right. To keep others out, essentially, right? They didn't want to keep those nasty pagans from coming into England.
It's so fascinating. I swear I could talk to you guys for hours and hours and hours. But, when I think about the wall they built in Game of Thrones, the ice wall, in a sense, it was the smart thing to do.
100%.
100% the right thing to do, to build a wall between you and your enemy. Mm-hmm. At some point, though, I think what we've seen, and again, if you haven't kept up on the show, don't listen to this podcast or watch this on television. You need to go catch up before you check out any social media probably in the world over the next few weeks. But the natural human reaction is to build a wall. And for a while, a wall works.
Yeah.
A wall absolutely works. Until it doesn't work, right? Is that one of the thoughts? And in
Westeros is a profoundly different world than the one we live in now. And so they didn't. What other options did they have? When the wall in Game of Thrones was built? Well, not a lot, right? And in terms of physically separating, but we have more options now.
You like Jon Snow? Is he one of your favorite characters? What do you like and dislike about Jon Snow? Ryan's smirking and laughing.
I've heard her rant about Jon Snow before.
Come on, what do you?
Yeah, so
I'm a Jaime Lannister fan. So
I actually really like Jaime Lannister. I mean, so Jon Snow's a little bit irritating. I think he's just he wants to be a feminist, and I think that he ultimately is, one of the big tensions is sort of what is his relationship with Dany like, and will he give up the throne for the queen? And that sort of serves as this grand like feminist moment of, everything that every woman like hopes and dreams about. It's like we're all.
You notice real quick
sort of like
when he tells
plot of a
Dany,
porn.
he tells Dany
Yeah.
that he is the rightful, has the rightful bloodline.
Yeah.
He doesn't tell her he wants the throne.
Right, absolutely.
He actually kind of forgets that part.
Yeah.
You could see where he hadn't really thought this through.
No,
Hey,
she's like,
Dany,
"Hey, by
just
the
so you
way."
know, I'm your nephew.
Yeah.
Just so you know, I'm your nephew. And she pivots instantly to, well, what does this mean for who's in charge? And he kind of goes, hadn't really thought about that. So you're right. Jon Snow is kind of this stumbling, bumbling.
He's this man without a plan, and I think that he's not.
Oh, so he's a man. So just so you know.
Yeah, he's a man without a
From
plan.
the men in the room, I will tell you, man without a plan, otherwise known as a man. So just
right. So yeah, I mean, man without a plan, and I think he's not not necessarily a strategist, but he's just a reactor, and so that only holds up so long. And so I think that ultimately people that have strong strategies and are willing to be take really calculated risks are the ones who are going to survive. And he just doesn't. And so it's part of why Westeros is in these different kind of camps and houses themselves, is because they have families or they have groups who have adapted to certain ways of life. And so what Dany wants to do is incredibly threatening to them, is to unify them or bring them together. Again, I mean, her motivations may be very, very different and more self-centered than perhaps it's not this sort of,
Yeah, you're kind of a Dany hater. I'm feeling that.
I am a little bit of a Dany hater.
Why are you a Dany hater? Talk about that. She's one of the most beloved characters in the show.
She is. No, and
but you've got a little tinge on Dany.
I do.
Why are you a Dany hater?
So I'm not. I started out as a Dany fan, and I think that there's really great things. But I think in the same way that Jon is flat, she also is equally flat.
Okay.
I mean, Jon is flat, and he's totally non-committal, and he's just kind of like, well, I'll be a reactor, and I'll help and protect my family and myself. And Dany similarly has her entire plot line from the very beginning has been, I am going to reunite, I'm going to take the Seven Kingdoms, and I'm going to be the queen and the ruler of Westeros and fulfill this dynasty or this legacy that she feels very much entitled to. And so she's like a woman with a mission and with motivation. You have to respect and admire that. And she's had lots of benevolent moments, but she's also had lots of moments, as we've sort of seen in season 8, of reminders of her doing some really cruel and using unnecessary force. And I think that she is somebody who is inflexible. And so when she actually has the power to do something with it, what we've seen in season 8 is her, to your point, right? Her ability or her inability to let personal desire go and do what's best for the group, as opposed to fulfill her own personal desire. And it may not be in the best interest of the group to have her on the throne or to unify the group, or to unify all of Westeros together. But yet that is the only way that she can imagine society looking, is with the kingdom all united together, as opposed to imagining a different kind of social model. And so I think it's the lack of creativity, and it's also the lack of flexibility that makes her a problematic and really dangerous figure.
Yeah, I think the story of Dany is that actions matter, but intentions matter more.
Sure.
And by the way, if you say I intend really well, but you do very negative actions, there's probably a gap there that will prove that your intentions aren't true. And I think this is an important discussion for society as well today, because we've gotten away from organized religion. Religion's really not a thing anymore, statistically. It's just not. And so religion played an incredibly important role in society, had a very negative impact in some ways as well. But it played a role in that it said, here's how you should think and intend in theory towards others, and 10 commandments, and don't kill people, and have good intentions, if you will, as a part of life. With I always say that the two biggest philosophies that birthed America are capitalism and Judeo-Christian, the Judeo-Christian world. So now capitalism is more powerful than ever. Religion has really gone to the wayside. Most people 30 and younger are no longer religious. So I do think, whether it's religion or some other vehicle, intentions and looking at why we do what we do in society, not just what we do. Because here's what Dany's story is going to be. Dany's story is going to be, she did all the right things for the she did all the right things, but for the wrong reason.
Right.
For in the end, it will be that her intention was for personal gain, and she will probably end up destroying everything that she ever held high, because even though her path was one of good work towards that, but if your intentions, I think all I'm saying is that if your intentions are wrong, no matter what you build, it will be torn down eventually. What are your thoughts on Dany?
Even when her intentions have been right, things haven't gone totally according to plan. Like she had a multi-season, multi-book side trip to end slavery in Slaver's Bay, which she attempted to do by just burning down all of the slave-related things that she came across.
She crucified all of them.
Yep, crucifying the masters at Marine, burning all of the auctioneers at Astapor, and just leaving their cities to figure themselves out. And by figuring themselves out, they just did more slavery, but with the people that were previously slaves, now the masters, and the previous masters now slaves. So
yeah,
lack of forethought has been key to Dany's success.
Dany is the breaker of chains, with the intention of putting everyone in chains. Is that why?
Yeah.
Is that where your little?
Well, I mean, she breaks chains, but she doesn't have a plan to do anything once the chains are broken. I mean, her plan.
Her plan is for her to rule them all.
Absolutely.
Like so Dany is the. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. Lord of the Rings, the little guy.
Frodo again?
No.
Sam, Bilbo, they're all pretty small.
No, the Hobbit who's old and who wants the ring. Smeagol.
Gollum, yeah, Smeagol.
Gollum. Dany has Gollum sickness. Like Dany is a beautiful Gollum. Her whole pursuit is the ring.
Precious.
The precious. And in the end, as I brought up to that person that Lord of the Rings is that no one dies. I said, well, Smeagol dies. So Smeagol dies with the ring. I think Dany has a Smeagol-like ending that somehow, there's no way that if your intentions are, bad, again, because George R.R. Martin, if he's proven anything, he's proven that he will let bigger ideas, and that's back to why you teach this class on Game of Thrones, is that this literary piece, Game of Thrones, is wonderful in that it's entertaining, it's mesmerized millions of people around the world, but it's also caused them to think about topics that in normal society, without something stimulating us, we won't think of those topics.
And put them in conversation at the same time, too. I think if you have these conversations about politics or about humanity or about gender happening in silos, but you're forced to confront them not only on their own terms, but how they relate and interact with each other. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think it's this broader dialogue that Game of Thrones has, both with the ability to have with history, but also with the contemporary moment, that makes it such a really rich text and also show.
If you could apply three life lessons from Game of Thrones and the work that Martin put together, the literary work that he put together, and you could apply those to our society today, what would the three lessons be?
All right. Well, you're asking a history teacher and a literature professor, so you're going to get those answers right.
Let's get it.
I think one is that history repeats itself, and that history is incredibly valuable, and so that the answers to current and to future problems often lie in looking back in the past. They're right there in front of you. I would say that the second is that global citizenship matters, and here in Westeros, it's about thinking about not only what your own personal desires are, but thinking about the best interests of everyone. And sometimes those two things aren't always compatible. And that in being willing to not be selfish, or I think like having a sense of humanity is really critical. And
key to your own survival.
And key to your own survival. Yeah.
The desire to only look after you and your people ultimately will be a desire. If they win against the White Walkers, if they defeat the enemy that was always the real enemy, it will only be together.
True. And I think third is that the underdog is always championed, and that we live in a world where what's on TV and what's sort of flashed before us are people that are exceptional in really dramatic ways. that they're always kind of put up as a paradigm of excellence, and that in Game of Thrones, all of them pretty much unilaterally get wiped out pretty quickly. The people that have the most wealth or are the most beautiful or that live on the extremes, and that the key to survival and those who are most successful and who contribute the most to society are those that often are kind of hovering in the margins, right? The categories that we listed before, the individuals who are disenfranchised in some sort of way, and that we need to pay more attention to them because they really hard it.
We were saying before the show that faith and the study of faith, Christianity, had a huge impact on my life. I've done a lot of work on homelessness and poverty, and now helping folks who are in addiction. And I had no religious background, but Christianity and faith played a very transformational role in helping define my worldview. Interesting, though, the story of the New Testament is the story of this powerful figure, Jesus, whether you believe in that literal or as a figurative story, still take it in the same regard. Jesus, the most powerful being in the world, who takes a role of weakness and in a world that's in a biologically driven world like Game of Thrones that says strength's important and the weak don't matter and women don't matter. And the big tenet of Jesus was take care of the poor and the needy. Those that would be the greatest among you will serve the least. Actually, all the work that I've done on homelessness and in poverty, I've had a lot of experiences, and that all came from this idea that if you ever want to be powerful, power is really harnessed and shown to be true by how you help the least who have no power. But that framework is incredibly important. And what you're saying is Game of Thrones keeps trying to tease that up to us as well.
Definitely.
Ryan, what's your big life lessons as we get out of here for that Game of Thrones? What are you and your friends? What's really the lessons we need to take from us and apply to our real world from Game of Thrones?
They're fairly similar. Keep your friends close because human connections are important. Keep an eye on your intentions, since that can go, or things can go awry very quickly when you stop having the best intentions. And knowledge is power.
Those are good. Jana, Ryan, thanks for coming in today. Hopefully we didn't spoil too much for anyone. And if you watched this show on CBS, it's going to premiere the night before the series and season finale. Change Everything Live. Thank you guys so much for coming in. You're the man. Thank you so much. We'll be talking more about Game of Thrones online afterward. Thanks so much for coming in. We'll see you soon.